national sin, the neglect of the masses. I consider that the greatest national sin is the neglect of the masses, and that is one of the causes of our downfall. Those uncared for, lower classes of India, the peasants and the weavers and the rest, who have been conquered by foreigners and are looked down upon by their own people, it is they who from time immemorial have been working silently without even getting the remuneration of their labor. The poor, the low, the sinner in India have no friends, no help. They cannot rise. Try however they may, they sink lower and lower every day. They feel the blows showered upon them by a cruel society, and they do not know whence the blow comes. The one thing that is at the root of all evils in India is the condition of the poor. Priest power and foreign conquest have trodden them down for centuries, and at last the poor of India have forgotten that they are human beings. People cheated. Evidences from history. Ancient India had for centuries been the battlefield for the ambitious projects of two of our foremost classes, the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas. On the one hand, the priesthood stood between the lawless social tyranny of the princes over the masses, whom the Kshatriyas declared to be the legal food. On the other hand, the Kshatriya power was the one potent force which struggled with any success against the spiritual tyranny of the priesthood and the ever-increasing chain of ceremonials which they were forging to bind down the people with. The tug of war began in the earliest periods of the history of our race, and throughout the Shrutis it can be distinctly traced. A momentary lull came when Sri Krishna, leading the faction of Kshatriya power and of Jnana, showed the way to reconciliation. The result was the teachings of the Gita, the essence of philosophy, of liberality, and of religion. The ambition of these two classes to be the masters of the poor and ignorant was there, and the strife once more became fierce. The meager literature that has come down to us from that period brings to us but faint echoes of that mighty past strife. But at last it broke out as a victory for the Kshatriyas, a victory for Jnana, for liberty, and ceremonial had to go down, much of it forever. This upheaval was what is known as the Buddhistic Reformation. On the religious side, it represented freedom from ceremonial. On the political side, overthrow of the priesthood by the Kshatriyas. It is a significant fact that the two greatest men ancient India produced were both Kshatriyas, Krishna and Buddha. And still more significant is the fact that both of these god-men threw open the door of knowledge to everyone, irrespective of birth or sex. In spite of its wonderful moral strength, Buddhism was extremely iconoclastic, and much of its force being spent in merely negative attempts, it had to die out in the land of its birth, and what remained of it became full of superstitions and ceremonials, 100 times cruder than those it was intended to suppress. Thus, even the current of life, set in motion by the greatest soul that ever wore a human form, the Bhagavan Buddha himself, became a miasmatic pool, and India had to wait for centuries until Shankara arose, followed in quick succession by Ramanuja and Madhava. The result was the bringing back of the Vedas to India, a revival of Vedanta, such as India never has seen before. Even the householders began to study the Aranyakas. In the Buddhistic movement, the Kshatriyas were the real leaders. The whole masses of them became Buddhists. In the zeal of reform and conversion, the popular dialects had been almost exclusively cultivated to the neglect of Sanskrit, and the larger portion of Kshatriyas had become disjointed from the Vedic literature and Sanskrit learning. Thus, this wave of reform, which came from the south, benefited to a certain extent the priesthood and the priests only. For the rest of India's millions, it forged more chains than they had ever known before. The Kshatriyas have always been the backbone of India. So also, they have been the supporters of science and liberty. And their voices had rung out again and again to clear the land from superstitions. And throughout the history of India, they ever formed the invulnerable barrier to aggressive priestly tyranny. When the greater part of their number sank into ignorance and another portion mixed their blood with savages from Central Asia and lent their swords to establish the rules of priests in India, her cup became full to the brim, and down sank the land of Bharata, not to rise again, until the Kshatriya rouses himself and, making himself free, strikes the chain from the feet of the rest. The nation is sinking. The curse of unnumbered millions is on our heads. The unnumbered millions to whom we have talked of Advaita and whom we have hated with all our strength. The unnumbered millions for whom we have invented the doctrine of Lokacharya, to whom we have talked theoretically that we are all the same and all are one with the same Lord, without even an ounce of practice. Mass operation in the name of religion. No religion on earth preaches the dignity of humanity in such a lofty strain as Hinduism, and no religion on earth treads upon the necks of the poor and the low in such a fashion as Hinduism. In India, there is a howling cry that we are very poor. But how many charitable associations are there for the well-being of the poor? How many people really weep for the sorrows and sufferings of the millions of poor in India? Are we men? What are we doing for their livelihood, for their improvement? We do not touch them. We avoid their company. Are we men? Those thousands of Brahmanas, what are they doing for the low, downtrodden masses of India? Don't touch is the only phrase that plays upon their lips. How mean and degraded has our eternal religion become at their hands. Wherein does our religion lie now? In don't touchism alone and nowhere else. Priestcraft is the bane of India. Can man degrade his brother and himself escape degradation? The greatest of all truths discovered by our ancestors is that the universe is one. Can one injure anyone without injuring himself? The mass of Brahmin and Kshatriya tyranny has recoiled upon their own heads with compound interest. And 1,000 years of slavery and degradation is what the inexorable law of karma is visiting upon them. Another cause, monopoly of education. The chief cause of India's ruin has been the monopolizing of the whole education and intelligence of the land by dint of pride and royal authority among a handful of men. The whole difference between the West and the East is in this. They are nations, we are not. That is, civilization. Education here is general. It penetrates into the masses. The higher classes in India and America are the same, but the distance is infinite between the lower classes of the two countries. Why was it so easy for the English to conquer India? It was because they are a nation, we are not. When one of our great men dies, we must sit for centuries to have another. They can produce them as fast as they die. It is the dearth of great ones. Why so? Because they have such a bigger field of recruiting their great ones. We have so small. A nation of 300 millions has the smallest field of recruiting its great ones compared with nations of 30, 40 or 60 millions, because the number of educated men and women in those nations is so great. This is the great defect in our nation and must be removed. People have been taught they are non-entities. For centuries, people have been taught theories of degradation. They have been told that they are nothing. The masses have been told all over the world that they are not human beings. They have been so frightened for centuries till they have nearly become animals. Never were they allowed to hear of the Atma. Laziness and meanness. We would do nothing ourselves and would scoff at others who try to do something. This is the bane that has brought about our downfall as a nation. Want of sympathy and lack of energy are at the root of all misery, and you must therefore give these two up. Who but the Lord knows about potentialities there are in particular individuals? Let all have opportunities and leave the rest to the Lord. It is indeed very difficult to have an equal love for all, but without it, there is no mukti. And yet another cause, exclusiveness. One of the great causes of India's misery and downfall has been that she narrowed herself, went into her shell as the oyster does, and refused to give her jewels and her treasures to the other races of mankind, refused to give the life-giving truths to thirsting nations outside the Aryan fold. That has been the one great cause, that we did not go out, that we did not compare notes with other nations. No man, no nation, my son, can hate others and live. India's doom was sealed the very day they invented the word mleccha and stopped from communion with others. Whatever cloak ancient or modern sophistry may try to throw over it, the inevitable result, the vindication of the moral law, that none can hate others without degenerating himself. The race that was foremost amongst the ancient races is now a byword and a scorn among nations. Lack of organization. Our nation is totally lacking in the faculty of organization. It is this one drawback which produces all sort of evil. We are altogether averse to making a common cause for anything. The first requisite for organization is obedience. In spite of the greatness of the Upanishads, in spite of our boasted ancestry of sages, compared to many other races, I must tell you that we are weak, very weak. First of all is our physical weakness. That physical weakness is the cause of at least 1/3 of our miseries. We are lazy, we cannot work, we cannot combine, we do not love each other. We are intensely selfish. Not three of us can come together without hating each other, without being jealous of each other. We speak of many things, parrot-like, but never do them. Speaking and not doing has become a habit with us. What is the cause of that? Physical weakness. This sort of weak brain is not able to do anything. We must strengthen it. Another great sin, neglect of womenfolk. In India, there are two great evils, trampling on the woman and grinding the poor through caste restrictions. Do you know who is the real Shakti worshipper? It is he who knows that God is the omnipresent force in the universe and sees in woman the manifestation of that force. Manu again has said that gods bless those families where women are happy and well treated. Here, men in Western countries treat their women as well as can be desired, and hence they are so prosperous, so learned, so free and so energetic. But why is it that we are slavish, miserable and dead? The answer is obvious. Why is it that our country is the weakest and the most backward of all countries? Because Shakti is held in dishonor there.
End of chapter 2. My India, the India eternal.